we are all like the nerve ends on your own skin. See, at every point on your skin, there's a little nerve end going beep and getting information from the outside world. Another and another and another, all over. And they all constitute your total sensitivity. So in the same way, when all these people sitting around here, with their little eyes and little ears and things, they're going beep, and they're all really one common center, called I, which is looking at itself from ever so many different points of view. Only, we are so close to it, and we are so absorbed in the different ways each one of them is doing, that we neglect the community underneath. But we don't realize, you see, that just as we know how to do this, we know equally well how to turn the sun into light, how to blue the sky, how to blow the wind, how to wave the ocean, how to digest food, and I might add, to be digested and transformed, but the pattern keeps going, and it's always you. Only you see, you have this marvelous capacity to transform yourself without knowing that you're doing it. Therefore, you keep surprising yourself, and therefore you keep on doing it. Because if you didn't surprise yourself, you wouldn't go on doing it. It's just the very fact, you see, that you seem to be the victims of a thing you don't understand, and that you seem to conclude your life every time in a wipeout called death, where all your control goes, is just exactly that opposite condition to what you call being alive that allows you to be alive. One of the first things which everybody should understand is that every creature in the universe that is in any way sensitive and in any manner of speaking conscious regards itself as a human being. That is to say, it knows and is aware of a hierarchy of beings above it and a hierarchy of beings below it. If you take such a tiny creature as a fruit fly, which lives only a few days, it is aware of all sorts of weird little animals and objects and spores floating in the atmosphere which we don't even notice unless we've got a microscope around. And it criticizes them as being inferior animals and all that sort of thing, whereas human beings are things that it doesn't comprehend. They're as much outside its intellect as a quasar is outside ours. And we see these far-off objects floating in the heavens, and we have only the vaguest idea of what they may be. But there is, I think, a fundamental principle that everybody must understand, and that is the principle of relativity. That is to say that wherever you are, and whoever you are, and whatever you are, you're in the middle. That's the game. When you stand and you can see a horizon all around you to exactly the same distance, you're in the center of a circle because your senses extend a certain direction, in all directions, and therefore give you the impression of being in the middle. Now, everything in the world feels like that. And also it has its own kind, which look natural to it. You see, spiders and hydras and sea urchins and so on don't look very natural to us. We say, well, I wouldn't want to look like that. But they say when they see us, Well, what kind of an awful thing is that? And what a lot of nonsense it does. Because the definition of a person is where you look from. And they, you see, in their situation, feel just as cultured as we can possibly feel. And they have their distinctions and their snobberies, just in the same way that we do. Because you see, they dig all sorts of things that we don't even notice. We think a person is cultured because they play the piano or the violin, or they read poetry, or they have a big library and they have paintings all around, and they have a fancy house and so on, and we say, well, there's a person of culture. And we can see at once that this is really some rather elegant human being. But when you get down into the world of fishes, they have exactly the same thing. Only, instead of depending on collecting a lot of books and things like that, it is the precise way, the very subtle wiggles of a tail, the little tremors of vibration that makes one fish a very superior fish as compared with other fish. And all the other fish look at that one and say, oh my, to be like that, what a genius. To be able to do just that little extra thing, see? Because they're very sensitive. Even airplanes in formation can't begin to do what birds and fish can do in their communal swirling dances that they do. Here is a very strange thing, that every creature, therefore, which feels that it is human, and which knows that it's there in the same way as you know you're here, experiences being here as constituting a sort of blockage, the sensation of a certain tension which constitutes the feeling of I-ness, of there-ness, of being here. Because after all, every creature is a particular form. Everything is individual. Not only you as a total organism standing here, but all the component cells of your body, each one of them has some sort of a feeling of its own. And it is individual. You can look at a microscope at the right level of magnification, and you can see that thing there with its own little life. And if you examine the stream of your blood, you'll find it full of all kinds of organisms that are having all sorts of conspiracies and games and plots and eating each other and doing these things that like we do. Only we realize that we wouldn't be healthy as a total organism unless there were all these wars and fights and plots and politics going on between the various cells in our blood. But from their point of view, you see, they feel a little bit put out because they're being organized. There is this sensation of practically every living being of constituting a center of tension and of resistance. That is to say, of being a little bit blocked, or shall I say, of being in the way, being in one's own way. Imagine the opposite. Let us suppose, for example, that you got up in the morning with a feeling of total transparency. There's no resistance in your organism to the external world. You just float through it. You're part of it, it's part of you. And just in the same way, for example, that when you see, if you see well, you aren't aware of your eyes. But if there's something wrong with your eyes, and you see spots in front of you, then you are looking at your eyes, and your eyes are getting in your own way. And so in exactly the same way, the perfect form of man is unaware of himself because he doesn't get in his own way. He is thus, in this sense, completely transparent. Do you know, if you study your body and its dynamics, you will find that you are fighting all the time. Most people are, some aren't, but most people are fighting the external world all the time. Very many people are afraid that they will fall apart or somehow disintegrate if they don't make efforts to hold themselves together, or else that they will be disintegrated by some outside agency if they're not constantly on the alert like this, all around, you see, to protect themselves. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I'm inviting you to become immensely aware of the fact that if you do that at all, that you do it. And that you have, therefore, this sense of being alone, of being a particular separate form that is unlike any other form on earth. That's just you. And concentrate on that. As you focus on that sensation of distinctness, we'll even call this one separateness, the thing to do with all feelings that you don't like is to experience them as deeply as possible and go into the inmost depths of loneliness, and indeed, let us say, the inmost depths of selfishness. Because you see, the sensation of being you, this curious, lonely center of awkward sensitivity, subject to the most peculiar feelings and pains and anxieties and all that sort of thing, all that is an essential prerequisite for feeling something else. These two experiences go together. So what anyone or any being whatsoever who has a sense of centrality, who has a sense of selfhood, who has a sense of identity, that sense of identity is inseparable from something else going on that is defined as not being me, as not being under my control, and that may jump at any time. So, what I want you to understand is that these two sensations, one of being the lonely, central, sensitive, vulnerable self, living in the midst of a world that feels other, that is not under your control, I want to try and show you that these two sensations are really one sensation, or rather two aspects of one sensation. You couldn't have the one experience without the other experience. Now, this is a rather good thing to know, because it means that you won't panic if you discover this. People who suffer from chronic anxiety are always in doubt, you see, about this relationship between what I feel as myself and what I feel as something else. every living being is a manifestation of everything that there is. Crazy. But the thing is that what we do is to try and prevent people from realizing that this is so, by pointing out to them in the most subtle ways their limitations, and seeing if we can phase them, make them uncertain, make them unsteady. It's like all sorts of games that you can play, where if a person wavers, he loses. But people play that with each other all the time. And the reason they do it is not the reason they think. It is that if everybody were perfectly clear that they were a manifestation of the divine being, nothing very much would happen. But so as to keep everybody a little bit unclear about it, the whole thing bugs itself and creates these little doubts. So what we're beginning with is these little doubts, you see, these sensations of blockage, of not being very sure of yourself, but knowing very much indeed that you are yourself and that you're alone and it's all up to you. The terrible feeling of responsibility. So what I'm trying to point out to you is if you intensify that feeling and bring it to its highest pitch, you will immediately realize that you are aware of it only by virtue of the entire sensation of something else, something defined as not you. So the feeling of not you and the feeling of you are relative. They go together, and you can't have the one without the other. And if you can't have the one without the other, that means there's a secret conspiracy between the two. They are really the same, but pretending to be different. Because the whole idea is if there wasn't a difference, you wouldn't know anything was happening. There'd be just yourself echoing back at you, you see. And you'd feel like a madman in a hall of mirrors, where everything you went was just yourself, you see, in all directions, just you. Well, that's no fun. You may think that I'm speaking in favor of some kind of schizoid, pluralistic universe. No, the whole point is this, that difference and every kind of variety of differentiation is the way through which unity is discovered. And the fact that men and women, for example, as a primordial kind of difference, never can really understand each other is tremendously exciting. Because that's a way by which something happens. If it makes a difference, then it's there. If it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't matter. And what doesn't matter doesn't exist, because it has no matter. So when you get this extreme sense of your own existence as a rather painful fact in the middle of everything else, the everything else feeling and the you feeling are two poles of one and the same process. So that the real you is what lies between these poles and includes both of them. This is one of the oldest ideas in the universe, that the universe is the interplay of difference, and the primordial difference is between up and down, back and front, black and white, is and isn't, male and female, positive and negative.